Greetings, everybody. Roger's the name, and today we're going to be going through our summer 2015 anime first impressions. Well, I am anyway. And since it's summer, I'm going to have a lot more time to be watching anime, so I figured it'd be a good idea to go through the shows and give my first impressions and tell whether or not I think these series are good, meh, or bad. Now, of course, since these are only first impressions, my opinions are bound to change. So what I consider good here might be bad by the end of the season, and vice versa, perhaps, though I doubt it with some of these shows. So without further ado, let's go into our first show, which is Akagami no Shirayuki Hime, or better known here as Snow White with the red hair. Now, as far as this show goes, it's from Studio Bones, which I'm quite a fan of Studio Bones, despite their mixed endings. And this show is pretty good so far, I have to say. The animation is just simply beautiful and stunning. The characters aren't half bad, too. They kind of play the role of archetypes, some of them. Like, some of them are a bit simple. It kind of reminds me a bit of Escaflowne in a way. Except Snow White can defend herself a bit more than Hitomi could. But it's sort of this relationship where outsider falls in love with prince. Good historical series. Sort of a shoujo series, but it's very good, very well animated. And there's some unique concepts too, like the use of herbs, particularly, that Snow White herself, or Shirayuki, as she's called, uses herself. Like, she uses different herbs, and that's sort of what she's into. She goes to different islands. There's some unique things in here, so I'd give it a good rating, and I'd recommend you check it out. And apparently there's going to be a second season already, so if this show stays the quality it's at now, look forward to that. The next show is Chaos Dragon Serikiyu Seneke. I'm not going to bother trying to pronounce that properly. Just Chaos Dragon. This show is bad. Alright, so remember when before people would just paste Uro Butcher's name on shows? I do too, but those days are long over because it's another one of those shows that Uro Butcher wasn't involved with at all. But hey, it's off a game he wrote a character for, so we'll just paste his name on it so it'll sell. It relies overly on character deaths that don't mean anything, and they try to quote-unquote shock you, but ultimately fail because these characters are underdeveloped and I don't care about them. Simple as that. You're just going to be watching it for the violence and nothing more. It's just a bad show in general. The story is very hard to follow. The first episode is filled with lots of exposition dumps that don't feel very natural, and I just plain couldn't get into this show at all. Maybe that'll change, but considering it's joining the ranks of Aldnoah Zero and Gunslinger Stratos, I have my doubts. So, yeah, so far this is a bad show. I wouldn't recommend watching it anytime soon. Or maybe ever. The next show is Charlotte from PA Works. Now, from what I know, this animation was done from the same group of people who did Angel Beats, a show I'd never seen. Charlotte started out as sort of a fun show. Like, the first 12 minutes really grabbed me. Yes, the main protagonist was a pretty big Lelouch knockoff, but he had goals that people could relate to a lot more. I can't relate to Lelouch's goals. I don't want to take over another country. I can't really relate to Light Yagami from Death Note. I can't really relate to his goals either. I don't want to kill every criminal. But I can relate to wanting to be the top of my class or wanting to get a hot girl. That kind of stuff, it's a lot more relatable. In a sense, I could feel a greater connection to this character. However, after those first 12 minutes, it just takes a nosedive from there. It stops being about this guy using his powers to basically just screw around and get what he wants, and then it completely turns into, like, everything crashing down on him. And then it just goes into this generic premise of, you're going to a school filled with people who have powers just like you. Now, episode 2, on the other hand, wasn't that good either. It didn't have any subtlety whatsoever, and came off as too melodramatic. The backstories, they just felt like they were trying too hard to make you cry. and too hard to give you the feels, when it could have just done so with a little more subtlety, and making me care about the characters a little more. Like, to be honest, I don't really find any of the characters in the show particularly likable. I mean, you, the main protagonist, who is the Lelouch knockoff, can be fun to watch at times, but I don't particularly like him. I'll give the show a meh, because I wouldn't call it outright bad, but it's nothing you haven't seen before, and it just lacks subtlety in its tragic backstories, or at least the one I've seen so far. It looks beautiful, of course, the animation is amazing. If you want to look at pretty pictures, I guess Charlotte's not a bad watch, but besides that, it wasn't too impressive. Dragon Ball Super is the next show. Of course, Toei Animation loves to milk Dragon Ball. They've been doing it for years now, and since Battle of Gods and Resurrection F were so successful, they decided to further cash in on the craze. Now, Dragon Ball Super is actually a bit better and a bit of a step up from Kai, which I didn't particularly like. That's when you could really tell they were milking it with Kai. At the very least with Super, they actually put more effort into the animation, and it wasn't like Kai where they just made it look the same exact thing as DBZ. The animation in Super looks a bit better, and they decided to go a different route with Dragon Ball, whereas Dragon Ball Z and even Dragon Ball GT were very serious. This is more like the movies, which were a lot more comedic. Now, I haven't seen Resurrection F, so it's more like Battle of Gods, where it's a lot more comedic. However, what I fear with this is, from what it seems like, they haven't met Beerus in Dragon Ball Super, and Beerus is the main, I guess, antagonist, if you want to call him that, in Battle of Gods, in which they do encounter Beerus. Which leads me to believe that this is just going to be a retelling of the movie, only made longer and adding more stuff in. Which, if that's the case, I'm kind of gonna be disappointed. But in the end, if you're a fan of Dragon Ball, check it out. Otherwise, I'd give it a meh, because I don't think if you don't like Dragon Ball or don't feel anything towards Dragon Ball that this is gonna change your mind whatsoever. It isn't that great, but, it's an entertaining watch. A decent time waster. If you just want to sit around and relive some old memories if you're familiar with Dragon Ball, then I guess this isn't a bad watch. It seems like it's better at continuing Dragon Ball than GT was, so at the very least, it's decent. The next show is Gaku Gurashi, or School Live. Now, I just finished watching this like an hour ago, well, the first episode anyway, and I have to say, I'm pretty mixed on it, because in some ways, I could see it being kind of good, and other ways, I kind of don't like it. First of all, they spent most of the episode chasing a puppy, which I felt it went on way too long. Its purpose of foreshadowing the later events of the episode, aka the shocking twist, was alright, but I feel like it didn't make me care for the characters in the least. I don't particularly like the main protagonist, though by the end of the episode they do make me, ask questions about the show and what's going to happen next, but I didn't particularly feel any feelings towards the main character, positive or negative. It just felt very indifferent, who cares? And that's not particularly a good thing. However, I do like that the twist in the end was, yes, shocking, but I like that it didn't rely just on shock alone, because when a series just relies simply on shock, you're left with zero rewatchability whatsoever, because the only reason that it worked the first time was because you were shocked. The second time, it's not going to feel as shocking, and it's not going to be as enjoyable. But thankfully, with this show, they included a lot of foreshadowing that you're not going to notice the first watch unless you're very cautious. And that will definitely help make the show a lot more rewatchable and a lot more still interesting, still fresh. But besides that, I'll give it a meh only because I didn't particularly like this introduction. The dog chase just went on way too long. And also it raises questions about the plausibility of this show. Think of it this way. Who eats spaghetti for breakfast? I have not met a single person, and I know this is Japan. I don't know anyone who eats spaghetti for breakfast anywhere. I didn't think that was a thing. Second of all, and I know these two are a bit nitpicky, but the show should be a bit plausible within terms of its own world that it sets up. which seems to be like this normal, average, everyday, modern world with some supernatural elements. But my second problem is who brings a dog to school? If it's supposed to be our average, everyday world with some supernatural elements, which is what it seems to be, I don't know anyone average, everyday, Japanese school or not, that brings a pet to school. And we're shown in the episode why you shouldn't bring a pet to school, so that part seems silly. It's a meh show. Give it a few episodes, maybe it'll get better, but I don't recommend watching it right now. It has some good stuff, but we'll see. We'll see. The next show is Gangsta. Now, I was very much looking forward to this series because I always, if you know me personally, always go on about Shuko Murase, the director of the series, who also directed two of my favorite shows, Witch Hunter Robin and Ergo Proxy. And he's very much known for very dark, atmospheric shows that are a bit slow paced, but they sort of build up to an eventual exciting sort of climax. And so with this show, it's very much different from the stuff I'm used to seeing from him, because this is more in the realms of, say, Black Lagoon or Michiko and Hachin. It's kind of something Manglobe would work on, actually. So I was a bit skeptical, but it's turning out to be a pretty good show so far. The action was a bit meh the first episode, but I liked how in the second episode they sort of spread it through the whole episode so it didn't feel like just the first part was entirely exposition and just plot dump, and then the second part was all the action. It felt a lot more spread out, and I felt like the second episode there was a lot more character interactions that felt a lot more essential to the story and to the overall development of the characters and establishment of the characters. I like the characters so far, Nick and Warwick. It's interesting too that Nick is a deaf character. It's very rare in these shows that you actually see a character that is hearing impaired as the main character, so I think that's cool and unique. And Allie, she's pretty cool too, and I think she's very interesting as a character and sort of works well as the outsider to Nick and Warwick and what they do. So I'm interested in seeing more, despite it not quite working because it's a little too slow paced, which doesn't quite work for this show as well as it worked for Murase's other shows. However, I'm going to let that slide with the hopes of it'll be a lot more interesting later on, and of course, these establishments will build up to eventually something very good. So with that, I give it a good rating and recommend you check it out, because I think it's worth a lot more of the hype than some of these other shows. Next show we're going on to is Gate. This is the show I don't know how to feel about, like I legitimately am stumped on. Because part of me says, you know what, this isn't a bad show. Another part of me says, I don't really like this. Here's why. So the show is kind of about how just basically these monsters come through this gate and they attack Tokyo, and then he goes and he joins the army to fight these monsters through the gate. Now, I like this because it features an adult protagonist, which you don't really see often, and an adult otaku at that, which you don't see often. Usually, if it's an otaku, it's a teenager, a high schooler, whatever. That's the part of me also that feels a little alarmed by this. It's an otaku, which means they will try to pander to otaku, which is usually what they do when an otaku character is in the show. So that's why it's making me a little scared and a little shaky. I do like how the show plays it very, very serious, but on the other hand, I really don't. They're making these jokes about waifus, but they play it very straight. The show plays it I don't really want to call it dark, but it gets serious. It's more serious than the premise would lead on, and I just don't know how to feel about it. I'd love to hear your opinions specifically on this show because I'm just stumped on it. I don't know, because I like some of the ideas, but I'm not sure if they mesh well together. It's just gonna take a few episodes, I guess, to figure out my full thoughts on this series, so I'm just gonna leave it with a meh at that because I just don't know what to think of it right now. Next show is God Eater. Now, this was hyped mostly because it was from UFO Table, which they're very famous for Kara no Kyokai, the Fate series, Fate Zero, Fate Stay Night, Unlimited Blade Works, and soon to be Heaven's Feel. And of course, it's based off a game. I think the hype is mostly what killed the series for me, because I didn't particularly find the first episode anything to write home about at all. The characters were very boring. The story is something I've seen before hundreds of times over. Another Seraph of the End, Attack on Titan Blue Gender-esque series. I've seen it before. The animation, admittedly, is very unique, and while it's not as shiny and pristine as Fate Zero or Unlimited Blade Works, it still looks nice. Now, the music placement, I'll admit, is pretty whacked up, and Bob Samurai, the YouTuber, he made a very good point about the music and how it didn't particularly fit with the series, and I'd agree with that. Sometimes there was music, or should I say, there wasn't music when there should have been, which I didn't particularly like. And so far, I'm just very unimpressed. Can the series improve? I hope so. The fact that it's based off a game which seems to mostly be enjoyable because of its gameplay, it kind of leaves me skeptical. I'm going to give it a meh rating only because it's the first episode and it's just very hard to say the direction the series will take based on me who hasn't played any of the God Eater games. If you have played the games, please enlighten me on the story of the games versus how UFO Table's adapting it. I have not really anything good to say about the story because it isn't terrible or anything, it's just been done before so many times. With that being said, maybe in a few episodes it'll get interesting. If it doesn't, then it doesn't. What can I say? I don't think the first episode really was worth the hype whatsoever. Gonna be skipping a lot of things and go down to Prison School. Now, this is another series that received quite a bit of hype, and I had heard a lot of things about the Prison School manga before the first episode came out, and I have to say, I really did not like the first episode whatsoever. Now, I know that I say, it's only the first episode, it can improve, but I really didn't like the first episode. It has a lot of the humor that I don't like. I've established this when I talked about Persona 4 the animation, that I really don't like Battle of the Sexes humor. It's just never appealed to me. I've never found it funny. It's just never gotten a laugh out of me. If you find it funny, that's fine. You'll definitely enjoy this show then. But to me, it just seems very cheap and it just doesn't get a laugh out of me. Then, of course, there's the fetish humor, which I didn't particularly find all that funny. On one hand, this could be an interesting show for all I know, but from what it seems, the next few episodes are just going to be more of the same kind of humor that I don't really like. So, this show just doesn't seem for me by any stretch. We'll see how the next few episodes pan out. I do like a few of the ideas within the show, such as the idea of very few men in an all-girls school. It kind of reminded me of that article I had read a while back about this one boy who was attending a Japanese school and the rest of his classmates were girls. I guess if you like the kind of humor that I'm talking about, where it's very much like girls versus boys humor, you might like it. Another thing I'm going to forget to mention if I don't mention it now. The faces in the show are actually the stuff that did get a laugh out of me. I did find the ridiculous, zany faces that the show constantly pulls off to be very funny, and it sort of reminded me of the comedies I like that pull off those ridiculous faces. And it also kind of shows why I like anime as a comedy medium, or animation in general. Because you can't pull off these funny faces in live action, or at the very least successfully. In that regard, Prison School is pretty good at those crazy faces, but I don't like the Battle of Sexes humor, and I don't like the fetish humor, so I'm gonna give this show a meh, just because I don't think the series is bad, per se, but it's definitely not for me. The next show I'm going to be talking about is Overlord, which is from Madhouse Studios, and it seems to be another one of those shows, basically where they're trapped in a video game and the like. So what did I think of this? It wasn't good. No, it wasn't. First of all, the show itself just seems to do what No Game No Life already did, which was glorify this otaku lifestyle of just sitting at home and playing games. The main protagonist has no family, no friends, nothing to speak of, so he just feels, okay, it's fine if I just play these games. Now, my other problem with the series is what it sets up, which seems to be just this very boring story. Like, I wasn't particularly interested, because I just watched episode 2 today. I wasn't particularly interested with episode 2 because nothing much happened. It was just the NPCs fighting over the main character thinking he was hot and a bunch of juvenile jokes. And, I'm past that. It's not particularly funny. The premise seems like it could be interesting when you realize the guy can, from what it seems like, he can log out, correct me if I'm wrong. He just chooses not to, so it really isn't trapped in a video game. It's him being in a video game on the last day the servers are open. The servers happen to not close off, and then he just sort of stays there, and then people praise him for reasons unknown, because I really have no reason to agree with these NPC characters that keep praising him. Because I don't know thing one about this guy other than he lives alone, and it seems like this show is just going to glorify this guy I barely know about and his otaku lifestyle that isn't very much worth glorifying, if you ask me. So, I'm gonna give this a bad rating because I don't think it's particularly good, and I don't see it improving, even with the twist, or cliffhanger, I should say, that episode 2 is giving us. It really wasn't that good. I wouldn't bother with the series really at all. It just doesn't seem to be worth the time. Alright, so now the next show, which, man, do I have a lot to say about this show. Ronpo Kitan, Game of Laplace. Oh boy. I believe this is one of the very first shows I watched this season. I think this, I'll check later, but I'm pretty sure this was the first show I watched this season. And man, was I off to a bad start. Because this show is downright terrible. Now, this show is loosely inspired, and I'm going to say loosely because I don't think most of the stuff was in his books, but it's based off the novels of Edogawa Ranpo. Now, if you're familiar with the series Detective Conan, you'll know that Conan Edogawa, he got his alias, Conan Edogawa, from his first name from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, of course, writer of the Sherlock Holmes books, and he got his last name from this man, the Japanese Arthur Conan Doyle, Edogawa Ranpo, Conan Edogawa. I'm not very much familiar with the guy's works, but I'm pretty sure he was rolling in his grave when the show came out, because this show isn't the least bit good. First of all, it features a main character that is not the least bit likable and pretty much is a freak. This main character is a boy that looks like a girl, and of course this is from Studio Lurke. This boy finds solving murders to be fun. He doesn't do it for justice, he doesn't do it for the good, he doesn't do it for revenge, does it because it's fun. And that's what gets me the most. Not to mention, it's a mystery show that has no mystery. Like, the mysteries in this show aren't very good. The second episode was a total train wreck of epic proportions. I mean, if you want to watch something terrible, if you want to watch a complete train wreck, this is your best bet for this season, because this is downright bad. Like, I don't even need to rate this show, it's so horrible. Episode 2 is just a mess. Like, the whole thing about I want to become a chair, the plot twist involving a teacher we've never met before and have no opinions of, it just isn't good at all. Don't watch it. Don't waste your time with this. Just stay far away from this show and don't hurt Mr. Edogawa Ranpo any more than he needs to be, because I don't think this is the least bit representative of his works at all. So the next show, Raka, Braves of the Six Flowers. Now, this show is from Studio Passion. I think that's how you pronounce it. Is it Passionné? Oh, who cares? And they've only been known for, I believe, Rail Wars, a show I've never seen, nor do I particularly want to watch. This show is actually not too bad so far. It stars sort of this protagonist that's reminiscent. I wanted to say he was sort of reminiscent of Favreau from Rage of Bahamut Genesis, but he doesn't kind of remind me of him so much anymore. but he's this character who claims to be he's the strongest in the world. At the beginning of the episode, there's this tournament, and two people are fighting, but he outsmarts both of them and he defeats them, and he's got these cool tricks. He's a cool fighter, and I like his multitude of different tricks. And I love the setting too, because it's very like South American sort of setting, like Road to El Dorado, that kind of setting, which is very unique for an anime. Another thing I really like is the music and the cinematography. I like those very wide swoops where they pan out very much into the far distance with this epic score playing. It feels very much like I'm watching this amazing movie. Every time I see the cinematography, it's very good. But where it falters, episode 1 had this huge, huge plot dump, and this character that pretty much seemed to have only go into the show just to dump exposition at you. So I didn't like that. And then the second episode had this very bad CGI. I wouldn't say bad so much as jarring. The action wasn't that great, but there's a lot of cool powers. The princess that he's fighting with has some pretty cool powers. So it looks to be, at the very least, a cool looking show. Like I'd give it a good rating, but I'm kind of skeptical for a couple of reasons. One reason is it's from a studio that is only famous for a bad work. Second is that it's based off an ongoing light novel adaptation, which either means there's going to be an eventual second core, or what will happen is it'll have a read the manga, or read the light novel in this case, ending. I'm enjoying the show so far, but I don't know. It kind of has me skeptical. So the next show, and yes, there are still a few more, I'm going to be talking about is Minetta, or A Boring World Where the Concept of Dirty Jokes Doesn't Exist. This show actually caught me by surprise because I was looking on Funimation's Twitter, and I saw that this show featured a character who wears panties on their face, and I'm like, this show can't possibly be good. And I watched it, and I found it pretty funny. The show itself has a pretty dumb storyline, but it's a pretty smart storyline at the same time, in which this world where dirty jokes just don't exist, and it's in Japan. And they have these collars that detect what words you're saying, and it's very good because it's taking this relatable topic of freedom of speech and the right to say dirty jokes, and it's a very relatable message, and what it's getting forth is very interesting. And the characters so far are very likable too. Like, I really like the main protagonist. He plays a very good straight man to Kajo Ayame. She is the terrorist who's throwing dirty pictures at people and yelling a bunch of obscenities and dirty jokes. It's very funny. I think it's a good show, so I'm going to give it a good rating, of course. But I will say that if you don't like dirty jokes the least bit, you will probably not enjoy this show because it's chock full of them. That's sort of the show's thing. So if you're not into that, you won't like this, but if you are, definitely watch it. Must watch. One of my favorites this season. Very good. So the next show is Sora ga Seiyu, or Seiyu's Life, which is from Studio Gonzo, one of my least favorite studios, so I had to watch it. And so far, I haven't seen the second episode yet, even though it came out. I haven't seen it yet. So far, this seems pretty average, and its concept is interesting, but if they don't do anything with it, I can see it wearing thin pretty fast, because it's basically just this concept where it's about these rookie voice actresses. According to the description, it's going to make, well, or at the very least the manga made, small but humorous observations of the voice actor industry, which is nice and all, but I see it being pretty underwhelming here considering they're making it a longer show. I just don't see them being able to do much with it, so it gets a meh rating. Also, I find it very funny that Gonzo still feels the need. They still couldn't help themselves. They included their bad CGI in this show. I don't know why the microphones that the Seiyu used to record their voices needed to be CGI, but they needed to include that CGI there. Don't ask me. It's there. Alright, the next show on my list is none other than Ushio and Tora. Now, this is the kind of show that I very much expect from Mappa, which is sort of this fantasy show. But I quite liked the first couple of episodes. It feels very much like a good Saturday morning cartoon that, you used to watch when you were a kid. And the character designs and the classic throwbacks, it's very good. Now, I would love the show to sort of get out of this very average sort of premise. Like, because the story is nothing special. If they can make it unique, because I know this is going to have a second season, and already the first season is 26 episodes long as opposed to the 10, I believe, OVAs that the 1992 version had. So it might be able to do a lot more with it than the original, but I don't know because I'm not familiar with either the manga or the 90s series, but if they can make more unique things about the show instead of just sort of rehashing the same things over and over, it can be a great show. Right now it's pretty enjoyable and it works as a nice Saturday morning cartoon, but if they could switch things up, it would be more enjoyable. I also really like the character interactions. Although the characters are very basic, I think they have very good chemistry, which is always a good thing when you're watching these kinds of shows. And it's fairly entertaining. It's worth a watch. I'd give it a good rating. However, I would like to see it be a little more unique. Next show. Now these are all a bunch of shorts that I'm watching. Well, two shorts actually, two small series. Donji Guy, which is basically focusing on the lives of five siblings. It's too early to say what this will be because the first episode established very little. It only told a couple of jokes that I don't have any opinions on. Didn't particularly make me laugh. Meh. Don't really like it, but we'll see. It's still way too early. The first episode really didn't tell me anything about the show other than the five siblings and then they're going to school. But we'll see, we'll see. Now, Million Doll. I like what it stands for, which is basically its own take on the pop idol style that Japan constantly churns out. I will say that it isn't particularly enjoyable, but at the very least, it does have an interesting idea. Its execution isn't that great because it's just too short to make a huge impact that I feel it could. It's interesting. What I got mostly out of the show was sort of the idea of how these pop idols are just simply phases, and then they just go on from one pop idol to the next. That's the idea I got from it, but we'll see the direction the show decides to go in as more episodes come out. So with that, I know this is a bit lengthy, but I give you my first impressions on the summer 2015 season. But with that, I'm going to give you my top 5 series so far. And so, number 5, I'd probably have to give that to good old Ushio and Tora. Very good as a Saturday morning cartoon watch, and pretty enjoyable as a whole. Then, at number 4, I'm going to have to give that to Roka no Yusha, because I think that has a lot of potential so far, and I'm enjoying the show despite some of its problems, and some of its problems it might have in the future. At number 3, I'm going to give that to Gangsta, because I think it has a lot of potential, and if it keeps going in the direction it does, it'll be good, but I think it has potential to be great if they just sort of speed up the pacing a little, because I don't think Shuko Murase's slower paced direction really works here. They might want to speed it up more like the last few episodes of Ergo Proxy. Like that pacing could work for this show. And at number 2 would be Minetta, because it's very funny, really good watch, really good laughs. It's delivering a lot so far. And at number 1 would be Snow White with the red hair. It's very good, not particularly unique, but once again, it excels in execution, and I'm really looking forward to what the next few episodes will bring of that show. It's nice to see a show like this every once in a while, and I love Studio Bones. So with that, I look forward to watching all these shows, despite how bad some of them are, and seeing what the future holds for these shows. Let me know in the comments what you think of the season so far, what you're watching. If there's anything I missed that's actually worth watching, let me know. And, happy watching. See you later.